Today, we're sharing a powerful story that begins with a flight attendant, Emily, whose split-second decision during a routine flight triggers a chain of events she never saw coming. Across the aisle is Kevin, a passenger whose quiet resilience holds more significance than anyone realizes. What follows is a journey of mistakes, redemption, and unexpected alliances that ripple through an entire industry. How does one moment in the air lead to change that stretches across borders? Watch to find out. And if stories of growth, empathy, and transformation captivate you, like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's dive in. The morning air was sharp, the kind that nipped at skin and promised a clear, brisk day ahead. Emily Hart arrived at Gate 14 with a practiced stride, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished tile floor of the terminal. She adjusted her navy blue uniform, running a hand over her blazer to smooth invisible creases. The Ridgeview Airlines emblem gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a symbol of the career she had once dreamed about, but now approached with weary professionalism. The airport hummed with the familiar blend of voices, the rolling wheels of suitcases, and the muffled announcements that crackled through the PA system. Emily scanned the boarding area, her eyes moving over business travelers in crisp suits, families shepherding their children, and couples whispering conspiratorially over coffee cups. She knew these scenes intimately. They were the backdrop to her life. "Good morning, Emily," called Anna, one of her colleagues, as she walked past, a smile breaking the tension in the air. Emily mustered a nod and a tight smile. "Morning, Anna. Ready for another day in the sky?" "Always," Anna said with a wink, shifting her carry-on to her other hand. The younger attendant's energy made Emily nostalgic for the days when she too had felt that spark. Emily's gaze drifted back to the line of passengers, her attention snagging on a young man who stood out in the sea of people. He was tall and lean, dressed in a navy jacket that fit him well, its polished brass buttons catching the light. He held a small carry-on in one hand and a magazine in the other, but it was the subtle glint of a hearing aid tucked behind his left ear that drew Emily's eyes. He adjusted it with a fluid motion, as if checking it out of habit. Kevin Reed. The name on her passenger list clicked into place. Emily's brow furrowed slightly, not out of concern, but curiosity. A hearing aid wasn't unusual, yet it marked a detail that would lodge in her mind for reasons she didn't yet understand. "Good morning," Emily said as he approached, her voice automatic. Kevin met her gaze with a nod, a polite but distant acknowledgement. "Morning," he replied, his tone neutral. As he passed, Emily found herself watching him a beat longer, a small wrinkle of confusion pressing between her brows. She reminded herself to stay professional, pushing away the subtle sense of irritation that rose unbidden. It was nothing, just another day, just another passenger. Once the flight began boarding, the controlled chaos that marked every departure settled over the crew like an old routine. Emily moved through the cabin, assisting passengers with stowing their luggage and directing them to their seats. Her smile was fixed, not forced, but no longer genuine, a tool of her trade. She stopped at row 12, where Kevin was already seated, gazing out the window with an expression of calm focus. "Excuse me, sir," she said, gesturing to the overhead bin. "Would you like any assistance?" Kevin looked up, his eyes taking a second to meet hers as he processed her question. He shook his head. "No, thank you. I've got everything I need." The slight pause before his response tugged at the corners of Emily's mind, though she pushed it aside as she continued down the aisle. The hum of conversations filled the plane as the last passengers settled, punctuated by the whir of the engines starting up. Anna joined her at the service station, the two of them checking last-minute details. "Have you ever wondered how many of these people have stories we'll never know?" Anna mused, her eyes flicking toward a woman in a red scarf trying to soothe a fussy toddler. "Every day," Emily replied absently, her mind drifting back to Kevin. There was something about the way he carried himself, self-assured but subtly guarded, that lingered in her thoughts. She didn't know why it unsettled her, but it did. With takeoff complete, the cabin settled into the rhythmic quiet that followed the initial excitement of flight. Emily moved through her pre-service checks, glancing at her watch out of habit. The minutes dragged and flew in strange, overlapping patterns during these flights. Time marked not by hours, but by rituals. Drink service, safety checks, the low buzz of passenger requests. Kevin sat in his seat, his gaze now trained on a paperback book. He adjusted his hearing aid slightly, a gesture Emily noted from the corner of her eye as she made her way down the aisle. The passengers in row 11 exchanged a few words with her before she moved on, inching closer to Kevin's row. "Would you like a drink, sir?" she asked when she reached him, her voice clear and pitched to ensure he could hear. Kevin looked up, meeting her eyes for a second that felt too long. "Water, please," he said, the hesitation more thoughtful than hesitant. Emily passed him the cup, noting the way he accepted it. Careful, controlled. Their hands didn't touch, but the moment felt tangible in a way that made her skin prickle. "Thank you," he added, taking a sip and turning back to his book without further acknowledgement. Emily moved on, her mind picking apart the exchange as if it held a clue she couldn't grasp. The routine around her continued. Babies cried, the engines droned, and passengers adjusted their seatbelts, but something in her had shifted. A tension she couldn't quite explain. Halfway through the flight, the cabin noise had settled into a soft murmur. Emily was returning from checking on the galley when she noticed movement in row 12. Kevin had leaned forward slightly, reaching up to adjust his hearing aid again. The action was quick, efficient, but it sent an irrational flicker of annoyance through Emily's chest. She pushed it down, telling herself she was just tired. The chime of the seatbelt sign dinged softly, signaling an incoming announcement. Emily readied herself for the service call, glancing once more at Kevin, who now seemed lost in thought. His eyes unfocused as he stared at the seat in front of him. Anna passed by, catching Emily's eye. "Everything okay?" she mouthed, a concerned look creasing her brow. Emily nodded quickly, feeling the weight of the unnoticed moment press against her. "Yeah," she whispered back, almost to convince herself. But the truth was, she wasn't sure why she felt the way she did. And as the flight continued, that uncertainty simmered, mingling with the engine's steady hum and the low, persistent chatter of the cabin. Emily moved back to the service station, trying to shake the unsettled feeling gnawing at her. The cabin was in its lull, the period where passengers were either absorbed in their screens, sleeping, or quietly chatting. The comforting monotony was punctuated by the occasional laugh or the low murmur of conversation. Emily focused on refilling the cart with fresh napkins and drink cups, her hands moving with a practiced efficiency that belied the restlessness in her chest. Anna joined her, slipping in with a half-eaten granola bar and a grin. "Want some? It's the only decent snack left on this bird," she said, offering it to Emily. "No thanks," Emily replied, giving her a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Anna tilted her head, catching the tension in Emily's demeanor. "Hey, you seem off today. Everything okay?" Anna asked, the teasing gone from her voice. Emily hesitated, glancing out into the cabin where Kevin sat. His focus was back on his book, completely unaware of the small storm brewing behind her composed facade. "Yeah, just tired, I guess," Emily said, but the excuse felt thin. Before Anna could press further, the PA crackled with a passenger's call light. "I'll get that," Emily said quickly, grabbing the opportunity to escape the conversation. As she moved down the aisle, Emily noticed Kevin reaching up once more to adjust his hearing aid, a brief look of concentration flickering across his face. She quickened her pace without understanding why, her professionalism overshadowed by an impulse she didn't recognize. "Excuse me, sir," she said, the tone clipped just enough to draw Kevin's attention. He blinked, surprised, as she stood beside him. "All devices should be properly secured during flight," she added, pointing at the hearing aid as if it were any other item that required compliance. Kevin's brows knitted for a moment before realization dawned. "It's fine. I just needed to—" Emily's hand moved before she could think, a reflex born of fatigue and misplaced urgency. She reached out and took the hearing aid, a moment of silence crashing down on the cabin. A few passengers gasped softly, their heads turning to watch the unfolding scene. The shock registered in Kevin's eyes, his mouth opening slightly as he tried to process what had just happened. The world seemed to freeze, suspended between the thrum of the engines and the collective intake of breath from those nearby. "Please," Kevin said, his voice even but tight. "I need that." Reality snapped back into focus, sharp and stinging. Emily's hand trembled as she placed the hearing aid back into his palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible as the shock of what she had done settled into her bones. The silence held a moment longer, thick with discomfort, before it shattered with the rustle of shifting passengers and the muted click of seatbelt buckles. Emily forced herself to walk back to the service station, her mind reeling with the knowledge that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The cabin crew felt the shift in energy as whispers began to spread. Emily stared at her reflection in the small metal panel next to the coffee pot, seeing her own eyes wide and panicked. Anna's voice cut through the noise, her tone a mix of disbelief and concern. "What just happened, Em?" she asked, stepping closer, her eyes darting between Emily and the rows of passengers now buzzing with tension. Emily's throat tightened, the weight of her actions pressing down like a vice. "I don't know," she admitted, a tremor in her voice. "I don't know what I was thinking." Anna looked back at Kevin, who had placed the hearing aid back in and resumed his seat, though his posture was tense and his jaws set. The disbelief had been replaced by an expression that Emily couldn't decipher, but felt was damning. "We're going to hear about this," Anna said, her voice low but steady. Emily nodded, the reality of that truth sinking deeper with each passing second. Kevin sat in silence, the murmur of the cabin fading into the background as his mind processed the moment. The brief flash of humiliation stung, but worse was the deeper ache of being reduced to a moment of misunderstanding, a reminder of the subtle, often invisible ways in which he had to navigate spaces built for others. He closed his book, fingers resting on the worn cover as he focused on the rhythmic pulse of the engines. The hearing aid hummed faintly, a sound that usually brought him a sense of control, but now felt like a tether to the tension around him. A passenger across the aisle, an older woman with kind eyes, caught his gaze and gave him a small, sympathetic nod. Kevin's expression softened slightly, the simple gesture reminding him that he wasn't alone in seeing what had happened. But that didn't make the moment less real or less sharp. As the plane descended, the tension in the cabin remained, like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. Emily's movements were robotic as she completed her final checks, her mind racing with what might come next. Passengers began gathering their belongings, shooting sideways glances that burned into her. When Kevin stood, he met her eyes once more. This time, there was no expression of shock, just a calm, deliberate acknowledgement that carried more weight than anger ever could. It was the look of someone who had decided how much space he would allow the incident to take in his life. And it left Emily more shaken than any confrontation might have. As he walked past her to disembark, the silence between them said everything words couldn't. Anna placed a hand on Emily's arm, squeezing gently. "Come on," she said. "Let's finish up." Emily nodded, the motion hollow as she watched Kevin disappear down the aisle, leaving her to face the weight of what she had set in motion. Emily stood at the entrance to the gate after all the passengers had disembarked, the echo of the cabin doors sealing behind them. The silence was suffocating, a stark contrast to the muted bustle of the terminal. Anna stayed by her side, not saying anything but offering a steady presence. "That was something," Anna finally said, choosing her words carefully. Emily turned, her eyes weary and searching. "I know," she replied, the weight of the confession sagging her shoulders. "I don't know what got into me." "It'll be okay," Anna said, though they both knew that was a wish, rather than a certainty. Outside the terminal, the cool air of the early evening pressed against Kevin's skin as he waited for his ride. The hum of passing cars, the shuffle of suitcases on concrete, and the occasional shout of a driver pierced the stillness. The incident on the plane replayed in his mind, the confusion and the unexpected disorienting sting of it. He was jolted from his thoughts by the sound of a familiar voice. "Kevin, there you are!" Marcus, his friend, waved from across the pickup zone, a wide grin on his face. The sight of Marcus grounded Kevin, reminding him that the world outside the airplane had not changed. He walked over, the tension in his body easing a fraction as Marcus pulled him into a quick hug. "Rough flight?" Marcus asked, his tone light but perceptive. Kevin hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, you could say that." He didn't elaborate, and Marcus didn't press, instead gesturing for them to head to his car. The drive back into the city was filled with casual conversation, but Kevin's mind lingered on the moment that had changed the flight's atmosphere. The next morning, Emily sat in the airline office, staring at the beige walls and the polished table that stretched out in front of her. Marissa Collins, her supervisor, sat across from her, a manila folder open with notes she glanced at periodically. The morning light streaming through the blinds painted stripes across Marissa's serious face. "Emily, we've received passenger feedback and an initial report from the crew," Marissa began, her voice even but not unkind. "What happened on that flight is serious. Can you walk me through your version?" Emily swallowed, her throat dry. "It was a lapse in judgment," she started, choosing her words carefully, but with genuine remorse. "I saw him adjusting his hearing aid and reacted poorly. I thought I was upholding protocol, but I overstepped." Marissa's eyes softened slightly, though her expression remained controlled. "This is going to be investigated. We need to show we're committed to addressing this properly." "I understand," Emily said, the words feeling final, like the closing of a book she hadn't finished reading. As she left the office, the corridor outside seemed longer than usual, stretching out with each step. Every familiar face she passed avoided direct eye contact, the whispers following her like a shadow. Kevin sat at his desk, the morning sun casting long stripes of light across the hardwood floor. He sipped his coffee, scrolling through the headlines on his phone. A notification caught his eye. "Airline incident involving hearing-impaired passenger gains attention." His stomach tightened as he clicked on the link. The article was straightforward, reporting that a flight attendant had removed a hearing aid from a passenger during a flight and that the airline was investigating. Comments were already flooding in, some condemning the airline, others speculating without facts. Kevin's name was not mentioned, but he knew it was only a matter of time before someone identified him. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Jonathan Reed, his father and the owner of Ridgeview Airlines. Kevin stared at the screen before answering, the conversation already heavy in his mind. "Hey, Dad," Kevin said, keeping his tone neutral. "I've read the reports," Jonathan said without preamble. His voice was deep, authoritative, but there was a note of concern. "I want to make sure you're okay." Kevin leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I'm fine, but this isn't just about me. This could be bigger, and it could mean a lot for the airline." Jonathan sighed, the sound both resigned and contemplative. "We'll handle it. I'll need to meet with the board about our response. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare a statement. It's your call how much you want to be involved." Kevin paused, considering his father's words. It was his choice, but stepping into the spotlight meant more exposure, more scrutiny. Yet, it was also an opportunity to advocate for better practices, not just at Ridgeview, but across the industry. "I'll think about it," Kevin said. After hanging up, he felt the weight of the decision pressing on him, pushing him into a familiar space between responsibility and personal boundaries. By the end of the day, news outlets had picked up the story, and social media was abuzz with opinions. Some passengers from the flight shared their versions of what had happened, their accounts varying in detail but consistent in portraying Emily's actions as inappropriate. Others speculated about Kevin's identity, sharing posts that ranged from sympathetic to accusatory. Kevin's inbox filled with messages from friends, advocacy groups, and strangers. Some offered support, while others asked if he would speak out. He sat at his laptop, reading through the emails and comments, feeling the press of expectation. He drafted a short statement. "What happened on my flight was an incident that reflects larger issues of understanding and respect. It's a reminder of why inclusive training is essential. I believe the airline's response to this moment can set a precedent for how we move forward." He hesitated before posting, then clicked Publish, and watched as the message spread. Within minutes, notifications pinged like a relentless drumbeat, the post drawing attention from both allies and critics. Suspension was swift. Emily found herself sitting in her small apartment, the minutes dragging like hours. She flipped through TV channels mindlessly, the news only reminding her of the situation. A story on the incident flashed across the screen, her heart dropping at the mention of the airline's statement. Ridgeview Airlines is committed to a full investigation and ensuring all passengers are treated with respect and care. The words "full investigation" echoed in her head. She turned off the TV and sat in silence, the quiet punctuated only by the sound of traffic outside her window. The guilt gnawed at her, a constant bitter reminder of her mistake. She thought of reaching out to Kevin but hesitated, unsure if it was her place or if it would even be welcome. The shame was consuming, and the isolation only deepened it. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to the turmoil of one flight attendant who had crossed a line she now couldn't uncross. The Ridgeview Airlines boardroom was a mix of dark wood and glass, sleek and impersonal. The fluorescent lights cast sharp reflections off the polished table where Emily sat, flanked by two senior HR officers. Marissa Collins led the session, her face framed by a pair of glasses that lent her an even sterner air. "Emily, this meeting is to review the details of the incident and discuss next steps," Marissa said, her tone neutral but probing. Emily nodded, hands folded tightly in her lap. The past few days had been a blur of self-recrimination and silence. She had spent hours going over every second of the flight, replaying the moment her hand had moved on instinct, unthinking and reckless. "Can you explain, in your own words, what led to your actions?" Marissa asked, leaning forward. "I thought I was following protocol," Emily began, her voice steady but tight. "But I see now that I overstepped in a way that was neither necessary nor right. I misunderstood the situation and acted without considering the consequences." One of the HR officers took notes, the soft scratch of pen on paper filling the silence that followed. Marissa sighed, a hint of frustration breaking through her professional mask. "This is serious, Emily. Passenger relations and trust are at the core of our business." "I understand," Emily said, her gaze fixed on the table, eyes tracing the grain in the wood as if searching for answers there. "We'll be in touch after the investigation concludes," Marissa said, signaling the end of the meeting. Emily stood, the weight of the room pressing down as she left, the hallway outside feeling colder and longer than before. Kevin sat in a cafe near his apartment, nursing a lukewarm coffee as he scrolled through the responses to his statement. Messages of support mingled with skepticism, a reminder of the polarized world he now inhabited. The chime of the doorbell announced Marcus's arrival, a welcome break from the screen in front of him. "Hey, thought you could use some company," Marcus said, sliding into the chair opposite Kevin. "Thanks," Kevin replied, managing a small smile. He put his phone down, the screen going dark. "It's been a lot." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, watching Kevin closely. "Are you thinking about speaking to the press? People are going to keep talking, whether or not you do." Kevin looked out the window, where pedestrians hurried past, bundled against the chill. The idea of public speaking had never sat comfortably with him, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just about him, it was about every person who had felt minimized or misunderstood. "I might," Kevin said finally, "but if I do, it needs to be more than a reaction. It needs to lead to something bigger." Marcus nodded, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "If anyone can do that, it's you." Back at her apartment, Emily paced the small living room, the television turned off to avoid any more news about the incident. The silence was oppressive, each tick of the clock amplifying her regret. She picked up her phone, the urge to reach out to Kevin pulsing through her, but she hesitated. What would she even say? "I'm sorry," felt inadequate. It was too small to encompass the weight of her actions and the ripple effects they had caused. Her fingers hovered over the contact list, and before she could overthink, she dialed Anna instead. The phone rang twice before Anna picked up, her voice warm with surprise. "Hey, Emily. How are you holding up?" "I've been better," Emily admitted, sinking onto the couch. I needed to talk to someone. Of course, Anna said. There was a pause, then a gentle prompt. Do you want to talk about it? I keep thinking about how I could have stopped myself, Emily said, her voice cracking. I let this reflex, this bias, get in the way. And now I don't know if I can fix it. You're facing it, Emily. That's more than some people would do, Anna said. It's a start, even if it doesn't feel like enough. The reassurance was thin, but it was something. Emily clung to it, even as doubt gnawed at her. After days of deliberation, Kevin agreed to an interview with a well-respected journalist known for balanced reporting. They met at a local studio, the room bright and buzzing with quiet efficiency. Kevin sat in the chair under the lights, the interviewer across from him with a tablet resting on her lap. Thank you for joining us, Kevin, the interviewer began, her voice warm but professional. Can you share what you want people to understand about what happened on that flight? Kevin took a breath, steadying himself. It's not just about one incident, he said, the words measured but heartfelt. This moment is part of a larger conversation about how we treat each other, especially when we don't fully understand someone else's experience. I don't think the flight attendant intended harm, but intention doesn't erase impact. The interviewer nodded, listening intently. What do you hope will come from this conversation? I hope airlines will take a closer look at their training and how they prepare their staff to interact with passengers with different needs, Kevin said. Empathy and understanding can't be afterthoughts. They need to be woven into the fabric of how we operate. The segment ended with a clip of Kevin's statement, shared across news outlets and social media. It sparked a wave of commentary, reigniting discussions about inclusivity and respect in service industries. In the days that followed, Emily watched Kevin's interview, her chest tightening as he spoke. He had handled it with such grace, turning an incident that could have embittered him into an opportunity for change. It humbled her, but it also pushed her to take a step she had been avoiding. She drafted an email to Kevin, each word carefully chosen, the cursor blinking as if questioning her sincerity. Kevin, I watched your interview. I know words can't undo what happened, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. Your response has shown me what real strength looks like, and I am committed to doing better, learning more, and listening. If you're willing, I'd like to speak or help in any way that I can. Emily. She hit send before she could second-guess herself and sat back, the room feeling slightly less stifling. It was a small step, but it was one she hoped would lead to something more substantial. Kevin sat at his kitchen table, a steaming mug of tea in front of him as he scrolled through his inbox. Among the flood of messages, one subject line caught his attention. From Emily Hart. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the mouse, then clicked. Reading her message, he felt a mix of emotions. Her words were sincere, tinged with remorse, and a willingness to change. It wasn't absolution she sought, and he respected that. Kevin closed his eyes for a moment, considering his next move. After a sip of tea, he began typing, Emily, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your honesty and the effort to make things right. If you're open to it, I think a conversation could be helpful for both of us. Let me know when you'd be available. He hit send and leaned back, the weight in his chest lifting slightly. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, a neutral space that felt safe but not too familiar. Emily arrived early, nerves twisting in her stomach. She watched as Kevin walked in, his stride calm but purposeful. He spotted her, gave a slight nod, and made his way to the table. Hi, Kevin, Emily said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Hi, Emily, he replied, setting his phone on the table and sitting across from her. The silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable, more like an unspoken agreement that this moment mattered. I wanted to start by saying I'm sorry again, Emily said, meeting his gaze, and not just for what happened on the plane, but for what it revealed about me. I'm learning that there's a lot more I need to confront in myself. Kevin nodded slowly, absorbing her words. I appreciate that. It's not easy to look at the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. The conversation shifted into a deeper discussion about the need for systemic changes, not just personal ones. Kevin shared his experiences navigating public spaces and the subtle challenges he'd faced that weren't always visible to others. Emily listened, genuinely this time, her mind opening to perspectives she had never considered. By the end of their meeting, they both felt lighter, as if a bridge had been laid between two distant points. It wasn't complete, but it was a start. Back at Ridgeview Airlines, Marissa called Emily into her office. The investigation had concluded, and while disciplinary action was necessary, Marissa also saw potential in Emily's willingness to learn and improve. "Emily, I'm placing you on probation, but I'm also offering you the opportunity to contribute to a new training initiative focused on passenger relations and inclusivity," Marissa said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Think of it as a way to make amends while helping the airline evolve." Emily's heart raced. The offer was unexpected, but it was exactly what she needed. A chance not only to rectify her mistake, but to make meaningful changes that could prevent future incidents. "Thank you, Marissa. I won't let you down," Emily said, a renewed sense of purpose taking hold. Kevin, meanwhile, found himself approached by several advocacy groups looking to partner with Ridgeview on the new initiative. The airline's proposal to create a comprehensive training module that included first-hand experiences and insights from passengers resonated with him. Despite his initial reservations, he agreed to collaborate, knowing that this was an opportunity to embed empathy into the industry's fabric. The first planning session was a mix of airline staff, training experts, and guest speakers who had volunteered to share their stories. Kevin was one of the key presenters, outlining his vision for what the training should achieve. "Understanding needs to be active, not passive," he said, addressing the room. "We're not just teaching policies. We're teaching people how to see each other beyond the surface." Emily sat at the back, taking notes and absorbing the energy in the room. It was a new chapter, one marked by collaboration and the hope that change was possible. The initial stages of the training program began with a pilot group made up of experienced flight attendants. Emily helped coordinate the sessions, ensuring that the curriculum included practical exercises alongside personal stories. One exercise simulated how it felt to navigate an airport with sensory challenges or limited mobility, fostering empathy among the participants. During one of these sessions, Kevin observed as attendants walked through a makeshift course while wearing noise-canceling headphones or weighted vests. Their reactions ranged from frustration to surprise, sparking conversations that were long overdue. "Is this what it's like for some of our passengers?" a senior flight attendant asked, her eyes wide with realization. Kevin nodded. "For many, yes. And understanding that is the first step in making their experience better." Emily watched the session unfold, pride and humility intertwining in her chest. She could see the change starting, not just in policy, but in people's perspectives. One evening after a long day of training, Emily found herself standing on the observation deck of the airport, watching the planes taxi and take off against the deepening sky. The wind tousled her hair, carrying with it the familiar scent of jet fuel and distant rain. She hadn't come here in months, not since the incident that had turned her world upside down. Kevin's voice broke her reverie. "Figured I might find you here," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. His tone was light, but the sincerity in his eyes spoke volumes. "It's strange being on this side of things," Emily admitted, glancing at him. "I used to see these moments as just transitions, people getting on and off planes. Now it feels bigger than that." Kevin nodded, following her gaze as another plane lifted into the sky, its lights blinking like stars. "Because now you know that every seat has a story." They stood there in silence, the weight of the past months giving way to a shared sense of purpose. It wasn't an end, but it was a beginning. The following weeks were filled with more sessions, adjustments to the training modules, and feedback loops. The airline announced the pilot program to the public, and reactions were mixed but hopeful. Passengers who had been following the story reached out, sharing their experiences and offering insights on how to make air travel more inclusive. Emily spent hours reading through these stories, some of which mirrored Kevin's experiences, while others highlighted new challenges she hadn't considered. Each story became a note on her growing list of improvements, a reminder of why the work was essential. Kevin continued to play a central role, meeting with staff and holding roundtable discussions that encouraged open dialogue. The process was slow, sometimes frustrating, but it was progress. The pilot training program had been officially rolled out, but as with any major change, it met with resistance. A handful of seasoned flight attendants voiced their concerns during a feedback session. "It's just more work piled onto what we're already doing," one attendant muttered, arms crossed as he spoke to the group. His voice carried the fatigue of years spent navigating tight schedules and demanding passengers. Emily stood at the front, maintaining a calm expression, even as her stomach twisted. She understood the sentiment, but knew that staying silent would signal defeat. "I get it," Emily said, taking a step forward. "Change can feel like an added burden, especially when it challenges what we've been taught to prioritize. But this isn't about adding more to your plate. It's about shifting the way we approach what we already do." Kevin, who was attending the session as an observer, chimed in. "It's also about understanding we're not asking for perfection, just effort." Passengers notice that, and it makes a difference. The room was quiet for a moment, the collective weight of their experiences settling over them. A few nods and murmurs of agreement showed that the seeds were beginning to take root, though not without resistance. One afternoon, as Emily was reviewing notes at her desk, she received an email from Captain Richard Hayes, one of the most senior and respected pilots at Ridgeview. He was known for his no-nonsense approach and had been openly skeptical of the new training. "Emily, I'd like to discuss the training program at your convenience. Let me know when we can meet." The request caught her off guard. She had braced for feedback from other attendants and staff. But to hear from someone with Hayes's reputation meant the program was stirring interest beyond her usual circle. They arranged to meet in one of the airline's quieter conference rooms the next morning. Richard walked in, a tall man with neatly combed silver hair and a precise stride. He sat opposite Emily, fingers steepled as he studied her. "I'll admit, I wasn't sold on this program at first," he said, his voice as measured as his gaze. "But I spoke with one of the attendants who completed the training, and what she described caught my attention." Emily's heart thudded, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm glad to hear that, Captain Hayes. What can I do to answer your questions?" He nodded, leaning forward. "I want to understand how this will affect the way we work as a team. If you can show me that it makes us stronger, not just better at customer service, I'll back it." They spent the next hour discussing the structure and objectives of the training. By the end of the conversation, Richard's skepticism had softened. He stood up, offering a rare smile. "You've got my attention, Emily. Let's see if you can keep it." Word of Ridgeview's pilot program began to reach broader audiences. A travel industry blog ran a piece titled, "Can Empathy Change the Skies?" featuring interviews with Kevin and Emily. The article praised the airline's proactive approach while acknowledging that it was still early in the program's development. "Ridgeview Airlines is trying something bold," Kevin said in the article. "It's not without challenges, but the goal is to create a model that others can follow. We're learning as we go, and that's okay." The piece sparked conversations in aviation forums and among industry leaders. Other airlines reached out to Ridgeview, expressing interest in observing the training modules and considering similar adaptations. Emily found herself fielding calls and emails from peers she hadn't spoken to in years. One evening, she sat at her desk, reading through a message from an old colleague who now worked for a major competitor. "We're watching what you're doing with interest. Keep pushing forward." It was a simple note, but it resonated with the validation she hadn't realized she needed. Kevin was invited to speak at a conference on accessibility in public spaces. The room was filled with professionals from various industries: hoteliers, transit officials, and airline representatives. As he stepped onto the stage, he could feel the weight of expectation, but took a deep breath, finding Emily's face in the audience. She gave him an encouraging nod, a silent vote of confidence that steadied him. Empathy in practice is not just about acknowledging someone's needs. It's about anticipating them, about making that understanding a standard. He began, his voice clear and steady. "In travel, we often focus on efficiency and profit. But what if the true measure of our success was how people felt when they left our care? The room was silent as he spoke, the stillness carrying a charge of attention. When he finished, the applause was genuine, and a few people stood, clapping longer than the rest. Afterward, Emily approached him, her smile wide. "You really hit it home," she said. "It felt right," Kevin admitted, the tightness in his chest loosening with the shared moment of triumph. The training program was not without its setbacks. A report surfaced from a flight where an attendant had failed to apply the new principles, leading to a passenger complaint. The news rippled through the airline, reigniting the skepticism among those who doubted the program's efficacy. Marissa called an emergency meeting, the air thick with the anticipation of hard questions. Emily stood before the room, aware that eyes were on her with a mix of support and scrutiny. "We knew this would be a process," Emily began, "but one incident doesn't undo the progress we've made. It's a reminder that consistency is our goal, not perfection." Richard Hayes spoke up from the back. "One misstep doesn't define the program. I've seen enough to know this is the right direction." The room exhaled as tension eased, bolstered by the unexpected show of support. Kevin, seated near the front, gave Emily a reassuring nod. She met his eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that they were in this together. The weeks following the setback were crucial. Emily and Kevin intensified the training, incorporating real-time feedback and additional workshops to address challenges that surfaced. The sessions became more interactive, with role-playing exercises and shared experiences. One attendant, who had been openly skeptical during the initial training, approached Emily after a session. "I didn't think this would make a difference," she admitted. "But yesterday, I helped a passenger who was anxious about flying for the first time, and I realized I was using what we learned here. It worked." He relaxed, and so did I. Emily's smile was genuine, her belief in the work reinforced by each story like this. Kevin and Emily were invited to speak together at an airline industry summit, a sign that their work was being recognized on a larger scale. The stage was set in a grand ballroom, the chandeliers above casting a warm glow over the audience of executives, flight crews, and journalists. They took turns speaking, their voices weaving a narrative of lessons learned, challenges faced, and victories, small and large, that marked their journey. Kevin concluded with a powerful statement. "We're showing that empathy isn't a weakness. It's the backbone of any service that claims to care about its people." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing in the vast room and settling into their chests as a shared triumph. With the training program showing consistent results and the positive reception at the industry summit, Ridgeview Airlines gained a reputation for being at the forefront of empathetic passenger service. Other airlines began implementing trial programs based on Ridgeview's model, reaching out for guidance from Emily and Kevin. The two found themselves consulting for airline boards, sitting in on video calls that connected them with executives across the country. Emily navigated these discussions with a mix of nerves and pride, realizing that her work had moved beyond one airline. Kevin, on the other hand, found himself at the center of policy discussions that influenced more than just air travel. One afternoon, as Emily reviewed the latest feedback reports in her office, she received an invitation to attend a travel industry gala in New York. The event would recognize individuals and organizations pushing for positive change in customer service. She read the invitation twice, her heart lifting. Kevin Reed and Emily Hart, honorees for pioneering empathy in air travel, it read. Emily picked up her phone and called Kevin. "We're going to New York," she said, unable to contain the smile in her voice. Kevin laughed, a rare sound that came from deep in his chest. "Looks like our work is getting noticed," he replied. "I'll bring my best suit." The gala was a dazzling affair, held in a grand hall lined with glass chandeliers that cast shimmering light across the room. The space was filled with the hum of conversation, clinking glasses, and the steady beat of an orchestra playing softly in the background. Kevin and Emily mingled with industry leaders, journalists, and advocates from across the travel sector. When their turn came to be recognized, they took the stage together. Emily glanced out over the sea of faces, her pulse quickening at the sight of so many people watching. But when she looked at Kevin beside her, calm and assured, she felt her own nerves ease. Empathy isn't just a word, Kevin began, the room quieting instantly. It's a practice that changes how we approach our work and each other. Emily continued. Our journey started from a mistake, one that taught us the importance of reflection and change. Tonight isn't just about recognizing what we've done, but committing to what we'll continue to do. Applause swelled around them, echoing in the space and filling them both with a sense of purpose that solidified the importance of their mission. In the weeks following the gala, an executive from a major airline alliance reached out to Kevin and Emily with a proposal to co-lead a workshop series aimed at integrating empathy-focused training into multiple transportation sectors. It would mean more travel, more time spent developing programs, and stepping into a broader leadership role. Kevin met with Emily in a cafe to discuss the proposal, the two of them seated by a window that framed the winter sky. Snow fell in lazy flurries outside, the chill countered by the warmth of their conversation. This could be huge, Emily said, eyes alight with excitement. But it's going to be demanding. Kevin nodded, stirring his tea absent-mindedly. I know, but it feels right, doesn't it? Taking what we've started and sharing it on a larger scale? Emily smiled, the weight of her earlier doubts lifting. It does. They accepted the proposal, preparing to embark on a journey that would take them beyond their familiar routines and into new territories of leadership and advocacy. With their new roles came a demanding schedule. Late-night calls, early flights, and cross-country meetings became their norm. While the work was fulfilling, it strained their personal lives in unexpected ways. Emily found herself struggling to maintain her friendships outside of work, while Kevin's rare moments of downtime felt increasingly fragmented. One evening, Kevin returned to his apartment, the quiet pressing in around him. He scrolled through photos on his phone, smiling faces at the gala, snapshots of sessions where attendants engaged in training exercises, and candid shots of Emily laughing during a break. The images were a reminder of why he had started this work, but also highlighted the cost. He called Marcus, needing to hear a familiar voice. You sound tired, Marcus said, after a few minutes of conversation. Yeah, it's been nonstop, Kevin admitted, rubbing his eyes. But it's important. It is, Marcus agreed. Just don't lose yourself in the process. People can only lead when they're taking care of themselves, too. Kevin promised he'd find more balance, but he knew it would take conscious effort. The work was important, but so was his well-being. Emily faced her own challenges. She had always been resilient, thriving on structure and the rush of meeting goals. But now, sitting alone in her apartment with reports spread across her dining table, she felt a different kind of exhaustion. It wasn't just physical. It was the mental toll of pushing forward without pause. A knock at her door pulled her out of her thoughts. It was Anna, holding a bottle of wine and wearing an impish grin. Thought you might need a break, she said, stepping in before Emily could protest. They sat together, sharing stories and laughter that felt rare and precious. When the conversation turned serious, Anna looked at her friend, eyes soft with understanding. You've done something incredible, Emily. Just don't forget that it's okay to rest. Emily nodded, the reminder sinking in. The drive to make a difference had been relentless, but it couldn't come at the cost of everything else. That night, she set her reports aside and allowed herself to simply be, knowing the work would still be there tomorrow. Kevin and Emily met for dinner after a particularly demanding workshop series. The restaurant was bustling, filled with the clatter of dishes and laughter from nearby tables. It felt good to be surrounded by life outside of the conference rooms and board meetings. To progress, Kevin said, raising his glass in a toast. To finding balance, Emily added, clinking her glass against his. They both laughed, the sound cutting through the fatigue. It's funny, Kevin said after a moment. I never thought that day on the plane would lead us here. Neither did I, Emily admitted, but I'm glad it did. It's made us better, hasn't it? Kevin nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. It has, and it's shown us that the real work doesn't end. It evolves. They sat in companionable silence, the noise of the restaurant fading as they took a moment to appreciate how far they had come and how much further they could go. The workshop series led by Kevin and Emily gained momentum, drawing participants from across the transportation industry. Attendants, conductors, and customer service representatives attended sessions that combined lecture-style teaching with hands-on empathy exercises. The impact was visible in the way people engaged, asking questions that demonstrated a genuine shift in perspective. One memorable session was held at a conference center in Chicago. A train conductor raised his hand, sharing an experience that struck a chord with the room. "I've been in this job for 15 years, and I never realized how much just listening to someone's concerns changes everything." "The training makes that clear," Kevin smiled, noting the nods around the room. "That's exactly the point," he said. "Empathy is in the details, in the moments we choose to care." After the session, as participants mingled and shared their own stories, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They were creating ripples that spread beyond airlines, affecting how entire industries approached service. The intensity of their schedule was catching up to both of them. Emily woke one morning with a pounding headache, the kind that felt like a warning. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at her planner filled with meetings and to-do lists. The drive that had propelled her through the past year now felt like it was tethered to a heavy anchor. Kevin, on his side, found himself staring at the ceiling in hotel rooms, sleep elusive. He missed the grounding routines of home, the simplicity of cooking breakfast on a quiet morning. The work, while fulfilling, had blurred the line between passion and exhaustion. During a layover in Atlanta, they shared a late lunch at the airport lounge. Emily poked at her salad, the fatigue evident in her eyes. "Do you ever wonder if we've taken on too much?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. Kevin leaned back in his chair, considering her question. "I do," he admitted. "But then I think about the stories we hear, the changes we see. It's hard to step back when it feels so needed." Emily nodded, a small smile forming. "Maybe stepping back sometimes is part of what we need too." They agreed to take a short break after the current series ended, a week where they could recharge and recalibrate. The decision felt like a relief, a permission they hadn't allowed themselves before. Kevin spent his week off in a cabin near a lake, the stillness a balm for his frayed nerves. The days were filled with long walks, evenings by a fire, and the simple act of letting himself disconnect. He called Marcus once, sharing stories of the quiet wildlife and the peace he was rediscovering. "This is what I needed," Kevin said, the sound of the lake's gentle waves in the background. Marcus laughed. "Told you! You need these moments to stay sane, my friend." Meanwhile, Emily stayed home, choosing to focus on hobbies she had neglected for too long. She spent an afternoon painting, colors blending into soft shapes that mirrored the abstract thoughts in her mind. The break reminded her of who she was beyond the work, something she hadn't realized she was missing until now. When they returned to their roles the following week, there was a newfound steadiness to their steps, a reminder that self-care was not just a luxury, but a necessity for sustainable growth. Their work caught the attention of a nonprofit organization focused on making travel more accessible. The director reached out, proposing a collaboration that would take their training program into under-resourced communities, offering free sessions that taught not only empathy, but practical communication skills. In a meeting with the nonprofit team, the room buzzed with enthusiasm. "This could be a game-changer," one of the directors said. "Imagine the impact we could have on smaller travel hubs and community transport services." Kevin glanced at Emily, seeing the light in her eyes. "We're in," he said. The new direction felt like the natural next step, one that expanded their mission while connecting them with people who needed it most. Despite their successes, not everyone supported the changes. Articles appeared online questioning the feasibility of integrating empathy training into industries where speed and efficiency were the main goals. Anonymous forum posts claimed that the programs were performative, a band-aid solution to deeper issues. Emily felt the sting of those words, the familiar doubt creeping back. She confided in Kevin one evening after a long day of presentations. They stood on the rooftop of the hotel, the city lights blinking below them like a living, breathing map. "It's hard not to question everything when criticism hits like that," Emily said, wrapping her arms around herself against the wind. Kevin looked out at the city, taking in the movement of traffic and the distant sound of music. "True, but change isn't about universal agreement. It's about moving the needle, even if it's by an inch at a time." The wind carried away their silence, leaving behind a sense of quiet resolve. Their first session with the nonprofit was held in a community center in a small Midwest town. The room was filled with local bus drivers, city employees, and volunteers who worked at the train station. The atmosphere was casual, the attendees more relaxed but curious. Emily led a segment on active listening, weaving in stories of her own mistakes and growth. It resonated with the group in a way she hadn't expected. One of the older bus drivers approached her afterward, a cap clutched in his hand. "Ma'am, I've been driving for 40 years, and today I heard things that made me rethink how I do my job," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. Kevin joined them, smiling at the exchange. These moments, these small, candid acknowledgments, were why they continued, despite the pushback and the doubt. As word spread, other communities expressed interest in the free training programs. Emily and Kevin traveled to schools, libraries, and small-town transit centers, building connections and leaving behind tools that empowered others to carry the torch of empathy and understanding. Feedback came in waves: letters from community leaders, stories shared on social media, and invitations to return for follow-up sessions. The momentum felt real and lasting, a ripple that extended far beyond what either of them had imagined when they first stood on that flight years ago. Ridgeview Airlines hosted an event to celebrate the program's 3rd anniversary. The company had seen a decline in passenger complaints and an increase in positive feedback, attributed largely to the training's integration. The celebration was held in a decorated hangar, with speeches, food, and music. Emily stood with Kevin near the stage, watching as Marissa addressed the crowd. "Today we celebrate not just a program, but a commitment to be better, to see people, and to act with understanding." The crowd applauded, the sound a symphony of validation. Emily looked at Kevin, who raised his glass in a toast. "To the work," he said. "To the journey," Emily replied, clinking her glass with his. In that moment, surrounded by colleagues and allies, they knew that while the work was never truly finished, it was worth every step. Years passed, and Ridgeview Airlines continued to be a leader in empathy-focused training, a reputation that had expanded well beyond the company. The original program had evolved, incorporating new technologies and feedback from thousands of employees. Training modules now featured interactive scenarios, real-life stories, and insights shared by passengers and crew alike. Emily stood in a lecture hall at a university that had invited her to speak to students in its hospitality and tourism program. The room was filled with eager faces, students who would one day step into roles where they could carry forward the lessons she had learned the hard way. "Empathy is not a checklist item," Emily told them, the weight of her journey in her voice. "It's a practice, one that starts with listening and continues with every interaction, every day." After the session, a student approached her, eyes bright with hope. "Your story shows that mistakes don't have to define us, right? That we can grow beyond them?" Emily smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Exactly," she said. "What matters is what we choose to do after." Kevin's work with the nonprofit had expanded to include a digital platform that provided free resources and training modules accessible worldwide. The initiative drew support from organizations outside the travel industry, cementing its role as a cross-sector leader in promoting empathy and inclusion. During a call with the nonprofit board, one of the directors shared statistics that illustrated the platform's reach. "We've impacted over 500,000 people this year," she said, pride evident in her voice. Kevin leaned back in his chair, a rare smile spreading across his face. "It's more than numbers," he said. "It's lives changed, perspectives shifted." That evening, as he walked through the park near his apartment, Kevin watched families play, joggers pass by, and the glow of streetlights as dusk fell. He thought back to the day on the plane that had started it all. The memory no longer brought the sting of injustice, but the realization of what had grown from that moment. A movement that transcended the initial hurt. Emily and Kevin met for dinner at a familiar cafe, their conversations now a mix of nostalgia and future plans. The cafe owner, who knew them by name, brought over their usual orders and left with a smile. "It's strange to think about how all this started," Emily said, stirring her tea. "How something so small led to something so much bigger." Kevin nodded. "It reminds me that change often begins with something unexpected. It's the choice to see it through that makes it worthwhile." Their conversation turned to new ideas, potential collaborations that could take their work into areas they hadn't explored yet. Perhaps more digital content, workshops at international conferences, or even co-authoring a book on their experiences. A few months later, Ridgeview's CEO, Jonathan Reed, Kevin's father, called them into his office. The room was lined with accolades and photos, reminders of both the airline's past and its transformative present. "I've been thinking about how far we've come," Jonathan said, his tone softer than usual. "And I want to propose something. I'd like to expand the current program into an international partnership with airlines across Europe and Asia. I'd like both of you to lead this effort." Emily felt a thrill of excitement and anxiety. It was a monumental step, one that promised challenges but also immense potential. She glanced at Kevin, whose eyes reflected the same mix of anticipation and determination. "We'd be honored," Kevin said, breaking the silence. Jonathan nodded, a rare smile forming. "Good. Let's set the bar even higher." The international partnership launched with a conference in Amsterdam. Representatives from airlines around the world gathered to hear Kevin and Emily speak about the program's origins, its impact, and their vision for global empathy in travel. The event was held in a grand hall with sweeping windows that overlooked the city's canals. As Kevin stepped up to the podium, he felt the same steadiness he had developed over the years. Emily stood beside him, her presence a reminder of how far they had both come. "We started with a single moment, one that challenged everything we thought we knew about ourselves and our industry," Kevin began. "But that moment became a spark, igniting change not just in policy, but in how we see and treat each other." Emily continued, "This isn't just about one company or one country. It's about recognizing that travel connects us all, and the way we approach it should reflect that connection." The applause that followed was warm, resonant, and full of hope. It was not just a recognition of their work, but a celebration of what was possible when mistakes were met with growth, and challenges were met with resilience. The following year saw the program's expansion across continents, with local adaptations that allowed it to resonate culturally while maintaining its core values. Emily and Kevin worked with teams in different countries, each step reinforcing the belief that empathy was a universal need. Their workdays were long, filled with flights, meetings, and workshops, but they balanced it with moments that kept them grounded. Kevin took up photography, capturing scenes from the cities they visited. Emily kept a journal, recording not just facts, but reflections and stories that inspired her. One evening, back at their hotel in Tokyo after a week of intensive training sessions, they sat in the lobby, the hum of conversations in different languages weaving around them. "Do you ever think we'll be done?" Emily asked, leaning back in her chair. Kevin shook his head, a small smile forming. "I hope not. Change isn't a destination. It's something we build step by step." Emily raised her cup of green tea, a silent toast. "To more steps." Kevin lifted his own cup, meeting her gaze. "To more steps." As we wrap up Kevin and Emily's inspiring journey of growth and change, I hope you found their story as impactful as I did. If you enjoyed this narrative and want to hear more stories of resilience, empathy, and transformation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell. This way, you'll never miss out on new stories that bring powerful lessons to life. And if this story resonated with you, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.